In this video, we're going to use the sum of squares polynomial factoring technique to factor an example. We'll factor the polynomial x squared plus 64. So we already know, we've said we're going to use that sum of squares factoring technique. Let's look at why, because that's one of the most important things with factoring is recognizing which technique to use. So we can see we have a sum here, the two terms are added together, and they're two perfect squares. We have this x squared, of course it's a square, and then 64 is also a perfect square, it's 8 squared. So what I like to do when I know I'm going to use the sum of squares technique is to write out the template. Do this especially if you're new. Okay, remember we're factoring in the form a squared plus b squared, and we know that factors into the two binomials. One is a plus bi, where I is an imaginary number, and a minus bi. Okay, so then I like to go ahead and set up, well, what is a, what is b? Write that out. We know that the x squared is in the a squared spot, so take the square root of that. A must be x for our particular example. And then the 64 is in the b squared spot, so we know that we can represent b as 8 because 8 squared is 64. So now we have this all broken down, we have everything we need for the template, and all we have to do is now place our numbers into the template to get this polynomial factored. So again, we're using this template and we're using this a and b, and let's factor our polynomial. So our first binomial will be x plus 8i. Okay, we just put in x for a and 8 for b in the first part of the template, and then we have x minus 8i. All right, and this is the correct factoring of our polynomial x squared plus 64. Now, if you need to be sure, if you need to be convinced, let's go ahead and multiply these two binomials and make sure we get back our original. Okay, but if you're good, this is our answer. So now we're just using FOIL to multiply through, and this will prove that we have factored it correctly. So we have x times x gives x squared, that's the first. Multiply the outer, we get minus 8xi, or you can write ix, whichever you want. The inner gives plus 8xi. Okay, and then the last, we have minus 64i squared. We recall that I squared actually equals -1. Remember, I is the square root of -1. So this term right here, we have minus 64 times, this is actually times a -1. And so that just changes the sign in front of the 64. That'll turn into a plus 64. Our outer and inner terms canceled, and so we've proved that we've factored it correctly. We do get back x squared plus 64. So that confirms it, and hopefully this helps you see how to use the sum of squares factoring technique. Check the description for a link to more examples, and good luck.